The man who had lost an ear and an eye was extremely grateful when he heard that he could exorcise this ghost and keep his son. The next day, he got up very early, spent a lot of money to kill a chicken and stew meat, and prepared a sumptuous meal. The mother-in-law and the wife looked after the baby, not daring to breastfeed it, not daring to hold it. They could only look at it from a distance. Neither of them paid any attention to the fact that the man who had been busy in the kitchen had stopped moving. The man's body was found in the pigsty. His head was half chewed, the flesh on his buttocks and thighs had been eaten, his internal organs were mixed with mud and pig feces, the stench was indescribable. Seeing this scene, many villagers held their stomachs and vomited on the spot. The mother-in-law sat on the ground, slapping her thighs and crying miserably. The scene became chaotic. The shaman frowned, touched her fingertips, turned around a few times, and asked, "Where were the ashes of your granddaughter thrown?" The mother-in-law sobbed, and when she heard this, she suddenly jumped. "It's right here in this pigsty." It was the coldest time of the year, the man did not want to go out and throw the body away. The child was burned in the charcoal stove, the smell was everywhere, it was very unpleasant to smell. The man took the child's ashes and threw them into his pigsty. No need to ask, it was definitely trampled. No wonder, no wonder. The shaman mumbled, only a few brave people used a rake to scrape the out. While they were busy, the wife in the house made a fuss again. "So hungry, so hungry." The wife screamed and cried. A group of people surrounded the shaman and squeezed in, seeing the wife constantly stuffing cotton into her mouth. Her cotton blanket, stained with blood and milk, had been torn to pieces. There was quite a bit of cotton missing, and without asking, it was clear that it had all gone into her stomach. Several people hurriedly pressed her onto the dirt bed. "So hungry. So hungry. Let me eat. Let me eat." The wife struggled and screamed, making strange noises in her throat. "What do you want to eat?" The shaman knocked on the edge of the bed, staring at her and asking. The wife stopped screaming, rolled her eyes, and opened her mouth to say, "Fried eggs with young basil leaves." Seeing that the ghost fetus was willing to negotiate, the shaman breathed a sigh of relief. It was a blessing that such a ferocious thing didn't need to be directly confronted, so she immediately gave instructions on how to cook. The wife stopped making a fuss, and started to cry miserably, waving her arms and kicking her legs. The people pressing her down were so tired that sweat poured down their foreheads. In the room filled with chickens and dogs, the mother-in-law suddenly came forward and grabbed the shaman's hand. "Fried eggs with young basil leaves is my daughter-in-law's favorite dish. Do ghost fetuses eat that too?" It turned out that the daughter-in-law of this family had a passion for food, and eggs fried with young basil leaves were her favorite food. However, basil leaves were cold, and after she became pregnant, her mother-in-law stopped letting her eat them. Then, there was an incident in the village where a woman gave birth, and the child was too big to be born. The man of that family asked the midwife to cut open the mother's place, which eventually caused the mother to bleed to death. After that incident, the wife was afraid that the child would be too big and difficult to give birth, so she began to fast, not daring to eat freely like before. However, she was hungry, and could only touch her stomach day after day and whisper, "Son, wait until after you are born, I will take you to eat some delicious meals." Eggs fried with young basil leaves, old hen, fish, the shaman understood as soon as she heard, the child in her womb could hear sounds from outside. Moreover, she was also the biological mother, and she kept muttering to herself 3 times a day, making the child full of hope, thinking that after birth, he would be able to eat his fill and be satisfied. Unexpectedly, not only was it not born, it also died without a whole body, eaten by wild cats and dogs. No wonder this ghost fetus harbored such deep resentment, always crying out in hunger for food. At this time, the chicken, duck, and fish prepared by the man became useful. The shaman instructed the villagers to prepare some food and brought it to the bed. When the wife saw it, she suddenly used all her strength to push the person pressing her down, rolling and crawling to the bed. She held the chicken in her left hand and the pork leg in her right hand, stuffing large pieces into her mouth, devouring them. Everyone in the room watched in amazement. In just 3 to 5 minutes, the wife had already finished eating a table full of food. She didn't even spit out the fish heads and chicken bones, her mouth was full of blood, and her stomach was starting to swell. However, she still wasn't satisfied. She wiped her mouth and slammed the table, screaming that she was hungry, demanding more food. The shaman frowned tightly. With this way of eating, even if the ghost fetus was gone, the wife's life wouldn't be preserved. If you don't want to talk properly, do you want me to make your soul fly away? The shaman suddenly slammed the table and shouted loudly. The other wife was so scared that she looked at her a few times, then suddenly looked up at the sky, fell back on the bed, waved her arms and legs and cried loudly. "You bastard, I have such a big belly and I still have to suffer your torture. It hurts so much. Cut it off. Cut it off. Cut it into pieces and throw it to the dogs. You useless brat, it's better if it dies, let's see if it dares to reincarnate into my belly again." The wife bared her fangs and claws, crying and cursing. The midwife standing in the crowd shuddered when she heard it. When she gave birth to her first child, the wife had cursed like that, not a single word wrong. It turned out that the fetus heard everything and took it to heart. No wonder it took revenge on its biological mother without mercy. In the blink of an eye, an accident suddenly happened. The wife suddenly raised her right hand and stuffed it into her mouth. She bit off 2 fingers. Everyone was stunned. They only saw the wife's ferocious expression. Her fingers were chewed so hard that they were crushed. Quickly hold her down," the shaman shouted loudly. Hearing that, everyone came to their senses and rushed forward to hold the wife's hands and feet down. The wife stretched her neck, gulped her finger into her stomach, and fiercely looked at the shaman. The shaman was both surprised and angry. She kept shouting, ordering people to get dog blood and nails, determined to make this ghost's soul fly away and never be able to rest. However, the wife was not afraid at all. She sneered, spitting out a large mouthful of blood. The people who were pressing her down couldn't avoid it in time, and were sprayed with blood, screaming in fear. The wife continued to sneer, chewing and swallowing something in her mouth. By the time everyone calmed down, she had already stopped breathing. The last thing she chewed on was her tongue. Ugh! I covered my mouth and gagged. The aunt patted my back and handed me a cup of water. Honestly, this story really made me nauseous. The pig eating the corpse, chewing on its own tongue and committing suicide, one after another, it was all pushing the limits of my tolerance. I touched my stomach for a while, finally suppressing the restlessness in my stomach, but my curiosity was still aroused. The great revenge has been avenged. Have those 2 ghost fetuses really left? Gone. The aunt nodded. I let out a sigh of relief, but then, a thought popped into my head. That's not right. The man and his wife were both dead, leaving only the mother-in-law and the baby boy in the house. This mother-in-law only thought about her longevity soup, and wasn't happy when her grandson was born. So what would be the fate of this poor baby? I was terrified and quickly asked the aunt what happened next. The truth proved that I had guessed correctly. After the funeral for the couple, less than 2 days had passed before the child went missing. The mother-in-law cried and groaned, saying that it must be the ghost of the fetus that had not yet dissipated, taking away her only grandson. The villagers were scared when they heard this, and wanted to invite a shaman to come and take a look. However, the strange thing was that the mother-in-law refused to agree no matter what. She said that she was the only one left, an old and lonely person like herself, and that she was not afraid of anything, and that the child was gone. Everyone who heard this felt uncomfortable, but the victim did not pursue the matter, and no one in the village dared to say much, and just let it go. Then, not long after, the words of an 8-year-old girl caused the whole village to be filled with fear. The little girl said, when the adults went out to work in the fields, she went out to play and passed by her mother-in-law's house. She smelled a very attractive scent, extremely fragrant. Although she heard that her mother-in-law's house was haunted, which made her feel scared, she couldn't help but be curious and hungry, and gently walked in. "Why are you here?" The mother-in-law was startled when she saw the child. She was stewing something, the fragrant smell wafted everywhere. Seeing that the little girl didn't answer but just stared at the pot, gulping down her saliva, the mother-in-law had no choice but to scoop up a bowl of meat soup for the little girl. She carefully instructed the little girl to go home after eating, and not to tell anyone about this. The little girl took the bowl, and without agreeing, she started eating like a hungry tiger. According to the little girl, the piece of meat was white and rosy, fragrant, and stewed very tenderly. When she held it in her mouth and nibbled lightly, the meat immediately melted, so fragrant that the little girl almost swallowed her tongue. The legend of longevity soup has existed for a long time. The girl's words made the villagers terrified. But the mother-in-law refused to admit it, always insisting that she only drank chicken soup. Her grandchild was taken away by a ghost fetus. The villagers were helpless, both afraid and disgusted. They could only stay away from her. From then on, the mother-in-law lived in solitude. Fortunately, her body was healthy. She could raise chickens and grow vegetables, and support herself. Just like that, many years passed, until the mother-in-law was 90 years old, and an epidemic suddenly broke out in the village. The people of Dong Lai village vomited and had diarrhea. Their whole bodies were swollen. Within 3 days, half the village had died. Every house was in mourning, every house was carrying a coffin, half the mountain top was covered with new graves, and paper money was flying everywhere. The strange thing was that this epidemic only raged in Dong Lai village. All the neighboring villages were peaceful. This matter attracted the attention of the commune. The higher-ups specially sent some doctors to Dong Lai village to treat and save people, and at the same time search for the source of the epidemic. This investigation found out that there was a problem with the water source in the village. The doctor commanded the healthy labor force, and immediately drew water from the well that night. The mother-in-law's body was discovered at the bottom of the well. No one knew when she fell in. Her whole body was soaked in water until it was pale and swollen. After being pulled out, just gently placing the body on the ground, the whole body exploded into many pieces. Flesh and internal organs flew everywhere, splashing on the people present at the scene. The stench made people unable to stand. Even the knowledgeable doctor vomited. The villagers cursed, saying that the mother-in-law drinking that soup was immoral, so after she died, she was also soaked in water, turning into meat in the soup, causing the whole village to suffer the same disaster. From then on, the legend of that cruel soup was never mentioned again. The villagers of Dong Lai tried to avoid it, wanting to forget the horrifying and bloody memories of that year. The story had come to an end. The ant sighed. I quickly covered my mouth, afraid that I would vomit. At first, I thought that the longevity soup that the ant mentioned, the main ingredient was placenta. But placenta has been used as medicine. It has been used since ancient times. Why is it said to be immoral? Thinking of that missing newborn baby, I was both surprised and afraid. An answer gradually appeared in my heart. I tried to suppress my nausea, and did not dare to ask the ant. Because there was one point that concerned me even more. In the ant's story, the ghost child's revenge was told vividly, in detail, in every detail. I got goosebumps listening to it. However, the longevity soup she mentioned at the beginning was only mentioned in a few simple sentences. Such a cruel and inhuman soup, wouldn't it have to bear a more tragic and serious retribution? However, the old man who drank the soup at the beginning lived to be 100 years old, but was accidentally bitten to death by a wolf. The mother-in-law who was suspected of drinking the soup lived to be 90 years old, and accidentally fell into a well. Their deaths, were they all considered accidents? I pursed my lips, adjusting my emotions. Folklore has always believed that good and evil will be rewarded with good, and guiding people to do good is the ultimate goal. For example, a man fed a pig to a child, and was torn to death by the pig. The wife promised to feed the child but failed, and ended up eating herself. And the villagers who killed the girls also died in half because of the epidemic. Therefore, I feel that those who drank that soup will definitely not have a good ending. The more I spoke, the more I felt it made sense, and I nodded. The aunt did not answer me, only looking at me and smiling. She was old, and there were many wrinkles on her face. When she smiled, the wrinkles would condense into one place, and her eyes were almost invisible. But through that gap, I could still feel her gaze. Deep and dark, with unknown intentions. I've been sitting for too long, I should move around. I felt a little uncomfortable, coughed, and stood up with my stomach supported. The auntie was still sitting on the sofa, smiling and drinking water with her eyes squinted. I felt uneasy, took 2 steps, and suddenly looked at the large mirror in front of me. Through the mirror, I saw the auntie staring at me. Her eyes were greedy and cruel, as if she was staring at a dish that could make me live 100 years. My heart stopped beating, and in an instant my hair stood on end, and I turned around. The auntie was startled, spat out a mouthful of water, and then started coughing so hard that her guts would burst. "Auntie! Auntie!" I didn't know if I had misunderstood earlier, but when I saw the aunt choking on water, I quickly ran over and patted her on the back. The auntie's face became redder and redder, and she was clutching her own neck with both hands. She was like a fish out of water, gasping for air, only able to make sounds. I panicked, and quickly called 120, quickly following the first aid method the nurse taught me. But it was all useless. The auntie was still gaping, struggling, her legs kicking wildly on the ground. Because she used too much force, her fingers had pierced her neck. Seeing the auntie's eyes bulging, and her struggles getting weaker and weaker, I panicked to the point of crying, but there was nothing I could do. By the time the ambulance arrived, the auntie had already stopped breathing. "Honey, don't be sad, this was an accident, no one could have predicted it." My husband put his arm around my shoulder to comfort me. "But my aunt is 71 years old this year, she has lived a long life." I sobbed and wiped away my tears. After all, this aunt is a very good person. Old people love their roots, very few people agree to leave their hometown. However, when she heard that I was about to give birth, she took the initiative to come to the city to take care of me. Every day she changed the way she cooked, making me many different dishes, saying that she had to let her great-grandchild eat until he was fat. My hand suddenly stopped, a feeling of unease arose in my heart. "Honey, you said my aunt is 71 years old?" "That's right." My husband didn't understand, he nodded. I felt a chill rising from the soles of my feet, gradually spreading throughout my body. 71 years old, which was the time when the whole country was promoting family planning, probably 1960, which means, she was only about 8 years old then. That's right, she was still a little girl then. My husband sighed. So, she was the 8-year-old child who had eaten the longevity soup all those